Welcome to the inaugural episode of Cruising Off Duty. We've had our boat off duty for about 6 seasons now, but I don't want to start the story where we are now. Like any good story, I want to start at the beginning. Back when we used to sit along the Ottawa River or the St. Lawrence River and just watch the sailboats go by and dream of one day having one. Now in passing, I'd told her that one day I'd love to live on a sailboat and cruise around the world. And she didn't actually look at me crazy like most people do. She actually seemed intrigued, which then made me think, well, maybe we should get a sailboat now and sail on the Ottawa River, just to make sure that we actually like sailing as much as I think we would. Now, we had no savings, so I was sure she was just going to say no. But instead, she seemed to like the idea, and she just said, well, how much would one cost? And that's where I'll start off this episode, with how you buy a cruising sailboat and how to make sure your wife is on board. Because remember, happy wife is a happy life. So make sure she's fully on board before you buy a sailboat. Now, step 1 is a helpful step. Make sure she hates the winter. And my wife hates the winter. I scoured my hard drive trying to find any footage of Janice outside in the winter, and this is the only one I came up with. I swear, other than going to work, she never leaves the house. But she loves everything to do with the summer. She loves camping, being outdoors, and swimming. So we went on a few carnival cruises just to show her that there's actually places like this that you can live year-round. And she couldn't get over how crystal clear the water was, and she loves all the fish. So now, not only did she hate winter, she loved the idea of living on a sailboat in the Caribbean. So at this point, I know she's fully on board with buying a sailboat, but we still haven't decided what we could afford to spend and how big of a boat we could get. So I suggest, why don't we go to the Annapolis Boat Show? Now this was probably a dirty trick in hindsight. Everything here is big and beautiful and, well, way out of our price range. We obviously couldn't afford one of these expensive new boats, so in the spring, we went to the Nepean Sailing Club and we just looked around. We walked the docks and pretty much had this vantage point from the deck. Well, not quite this vantage point. We didn't fly over top of the boats, but generally this vantage point. The boats on the left are the smallest, and as you move to the right, they get slightly bigger and slightly bigger. I pointed over at the day sailors on the left. I said those would be great boats for us to start out on if we just want to go out for the afternoon, but I could tell she really wasn't that enthused. So the first dock we walked toward the day sailors, where she wasn't that interested. They're usually under 20 feet, and you can probably get them for $8,000 to $10,000, but there's nowhere to go down below to get out of the elements or to even sleep for a night. So we went down the next dock, and they're about maybe 22-foot boats. A little bit more money, $10,000 to $12,000 maybe, but at least on a Tanzer 22, you could go down below and sleep for a night if you'd like to camp on your boat. On the third dock, you were getting to about 25-foot boats, and they're a little bit more reasonable for sleeping on. A little bit bigger, a little bit wider, a little bit more amenities. The fourth dock is where you start to get into what I consider the starter cruiser area. About 28 feet. Now you're starting to get full galleys, reasonable amount of sleeping space, and a head. Now the fourth dock is what they call A dock, and that's where boats are about 28 to 32 feet, and that's where I was hoping Janice would go to. I didn't expect anything more than that. Then after that, I figured I'd just point quickly over at the W dock, which is where the really big boats are. Well, at least the big boats for the Nepean Sailing Club. They max out at 36 feet, and I just called them the floating cottages. The next thing I hear her say is, well, if we're going to get a sailboat, I want a floating cottage. No matter which boat we choose, we're going to need a line of credit against the house anyway, so let's get the boat we really want. I was in shock, and all I could think of was, score! I really did feel like jumping for joy. This was incredible. Now, most people watching this may not understand what sailboats have, but most people have been in or around an RV, so I'm going to use that as a metaphor. Let's say your wife says, sure, let's get an RV, and you walk around the RV park, and this is the first thing you see, and you hope your wife doesn't fall in love with this, just because it's a little too small. You pass it by, and the next thing you see is this, and you think, well, if she likes this, it'll get us on the road, it'll do the job. It won't be super spacious or comfortable, but it'll do. Then you see this. Now she's intrigued, and you think, I could live with this. And you're already excited, but then just as you're about to leave, you kind of point over at that just as kind of a joke, and then she says, no, if we're going to do it, let's get that. Now obviously I'm exaggerating a bit when I compare this to our boat. It's not quite this swanky, but you got to remember, the Nepean Sailing Club only accepts boats up to 36 feet. So we went looking for boats, and back in 2010, there had just been a big recession in the United States, and boats were dirt cheap. We figured to get the best bang for the buck, we needed to buy a production boat where there were a lot of sellers with the same boat, all for sale at the same time, all undercutting each other in price. We narrowed down our search to a Beneteau Oceanus 351 from 1994 or 1995. We picked our favorite 5 and we put them in order of the one we thought we would like the most to the one we thought we would like the least, and put them on a map. They ranged in price from $60,000 to $80,000 US, and luckily at the time the Canadian dollar was almost par. Boy, are we glad we bought back then and not today, because I don't think we could afford it at today's exchange rates. We live in Ottawa, but the number 1 boat on our list was in Annapolis, Maryland. Now you hear horror stories about bad boat brokers, but we'd never experienced it yet. Even though we'd corresponded numerous times and we'd explained we're driving a 9-hour trip from Ottawa, and we agreed to meet at his office at a specific time, he was a no-show. You'd think some other broker in his office would step up and help us, but all they said was they called his cell phone, he never answered, they didn't know where he was, and they don't know where the key to the boat is. Even though the boat was sitting in their own yard, not one of them offered to go out and show us the outside. We had to say, can we at least look at the outside of the boat? And they said, sure, it's out in row 6. We figured we couldn't waste the trip to Annapolis and not even see the boat. So we went out looking for this boat in their large yard of boats. It took us a while to find it. In fact, a customer had to point us in the right direction. When we finally found it, there was no ladder to get up on top of the boat and look in through the windows, so we had to find that on our own as well too. The boat didn't look wonderful, but it didn't look terrible from the outside, but without seeing the inside, it was really hard to judge. So as much as we hated dealing with these brokers, we told them that we would come back a second time on our trip back north. I told them this time I hope the broker actually shows up to our meeting. Now with that horrible experience under our belt, we now had to plan to see our second favorite boat in Naples, Florida. That's right, we drove another 20-something hours, taking a few naps in truck stops and rest stops along the way, and taking turns driving to stay awake. Now I think this boat was the number 2 boat on our list only because it was the cheapest. It was only asking $60,000, and the pictures on Yacht World actually looked okay. This brings me to lesson number 1. Don't trust pictures. Brokers will take pictures of boats from the most flattering angles. They'll put lipstick on a pig and advertise it as a beauty queen. But no amount of lipstick was going to hide the fact that this boat was a pig. It had been beaten down by years and years of being in the Florida sun. There was water damage on the wood table and mold on the ceiling. The one thing that Naples had going for it is the broker was actually a really nice guy. He had 2 boats to show us. The first boat, that was the real pig, was actually a power of sail. He pretty much hinted that any offer above $40,000 would probably be accepted. This intrigued me a bit because I'm thinking for $20,000 I could probably gut the whole boat and start over and have brand new wood. So I said to the broker, give me a moment to discuss it with my wife. And when I talked to Janice, she looked at me like I was from Mars. She thought, why would we ever consider having a boat that has mold? So that was that. We were not going to be buying this boat no matter how cheap it was. I politely told the broker that we would not be interested in this boat at any price and he could show us the second boat. The second boat was better, only that it probably had been taken care of by its owner and there was no water damage on the wood. But the outside looked just as beaten up from the Florida sun and sitting in saltwater 12 months a year. This brings me to the most important lesson, lesson number 2. Boats in the South, especially in saltwater, age really fast. So even if you see an ad that seems like a screaming deal, in all likelihood it's been a charter boat and it's been sitting in the baking sun and sitting in salt water 12 months a year for the entire life of the boat. A 10-year-old boat that's been sailing the Great Lakes looks almost new. It's been under a cover every winter and has been floating in fresh water. Meanwhile, a boat that's been in the Caribbean or the South Florida for those same 10 years looks like somebody's taken a belt sander to the outside of it. And any boat that's been left closed up for any length of time in that hot, humid heat of South Florida or the Caribbean probably has mold. Now we were starting to think that we'd made a mistake going way south into the United States looking for boats. They didn't seem to be the deal we thought they'd be. Boats in Toronto or Montreal were listing at $90,000 to $100,000, but in all likelihood they looked pristine compared to what we'd seen so far. The next boat on our list was in South Carolina, and it was asking the most money. I believe it was almost $85,000. But it had a bunch of bells and whistles thrown in that we probably didn't even need. Things like radars and chart plotters and dinghy davits and a dinghy, and well, we need a dinghy, but we didn't need all that other stuff. As you can imagine, with an owner that's put that much gear onto his boat, that boat is well used. Now we're starting to feel this trip is a bust, and so we sort of go into tourist mode. We figure we're in Florida, let's enjoy it while we're down here. Remember, we've lived out of our car now for 2.5 days, and we're probably starting to look and maybe even smell a little bit like that pig. So we find this little motel for about $75 for the night, and it's got a heated pool, air conditioning, and of course a shower, which is what we really wanted. And it's right in the middle of all these man-made canals, and it's a short drive to the Gulf Coast beach, where we see sailboats going by and dolphins swimming, and we think, yeah, this is the life. One day we want to live on a boat down here. Now, we only had 5 days off work to do this whole trip, so we got to start heading north again. We decided to go across to Daytona and check it out for a few hours. I'm a fan of NASCAR, so I wanted to drive by the Speedway, but then after that, we definitely wanted to check out the beach. I mean, it's called Daytona Beach. It's got to have a good beach, right? Now, we love Miami Beach and Fort Lauderdale, so we thought Daytona would be awesome too, but were we disappointed? The water is this brown, foamy, well, I don't even know what it is. And then there's this smell of dying fish and rotting seaweed on the beach. It was just nasty. And did you notice this Ferris wheel and other amusement park stuff that's just sitting there rotting with nobody using it? It was kind of creepy. Anyway, we took off from Daytona and went up to South Carolina to see that other boat, which of course was way out of our price range and had a bunch of stuff we didn't need and they weren't willing to budge. So that was a short visit. And then on to Washington, North Carolina. But we almost skipped this one because we didn't really think we'd like this boat, and we were thinking we still needed to go see that boat in Annapolis again. When we would stop at McDonald's for breaks, I would use the internet and contact that Annapolis broker. He never does apologize for missing the appointment, and then when I asked to see the dinghy that goes along with the boat, he says, I think the owner has it in his garage and he doesn't live close to the office. So pretty much what this broker was telling me was he couldn't be bothered to go get the dinghy so I could see it. So I decided no matter what, I was not buying a boat from this broker. That gave us some free time to go see that boat in North Carolina, and boy are we glad we did. Although we were living in our car and ended up showing up at 8 o'clock in the morning to the supposed marina, and this is what we saw. It looked like a horror movie. There was this fog rolling in off the water, and all the docks were creaking and rotting, and a lot of the boats had fur growing on the bottom because they never moved. I walked around the dock looking for a Beneteau 351, but I couldn't find it, and I was thinking, wow, did we make a mistake coming here? When we met the broker at our 10 o'clock meeting, he laughed and assured us, no, that's not the marina he's at the one next door. And then we went and found the real marina and the real boat. See, this was the actual marina with real sturdy docks. The scary marina is the one in the background. This is the boat, and we were happily surprised. It looked in decent shape on the outside and extremely good shape on the inside. Now, while I was talking to the boat broker, Janice was going mad taking pictures of every angle of this boat, which I wasn't aware of till later. But in a way, it's good, because now when we look at our boat and wonder if that scratch is new or not, we can always go back and look at the original photos and realize if that was a scratch that was already there. In all likelihood, we put more scratches on than the guy who owned it before us, because I don't think he used the boat that much. Considering this boat is in North Carolina, where most people leave their boats in the water 12 months a year, we were surprised how good it looked on the outside, too. Then the broker explained it. The guy who owned it was originally from Pennsylvania and was sailing this boat on some lake in Pennsylvania that was fresh water. He just recently retired and moved his boat down here to North Carolina. So that explained why it looked so good. He also said there was a winter cover that was part of the package. None of the other boats down south even bother with winter covers, so that was a clear indication this boat was a northern boat. During Janice's 200 photos, she happened to catch one with me looking at the head. I'm looking happy because we finally found a boat that's good. I'm also looking very tired, but remember, I've been living in my car for 5 days. I asked the broker why the owner was selling it, and he explained it like this. He said his wife doesn't really enjoy sailing, and so she kind of told him she would rather have a powerboat, and as the first thing I said on this video was, happy wife, happy life, the owner obviously did the right thing and sold the sailboat. But his loss was my gain, and this is exactly what you want to find. A freshwater northern boat that's been barely used but well maintained, and then sold during a recession at a substantially reduced rate to what I would pay in Canada. Yay me. Even though we were ecstatic about the condition that this boat was in, we had to pretend that we didn't love it so that we could try and get the price down a bit. The reason this boat wasn't one of our top one or two was because he was asking $65,000 and he was really throwing in nothing compared to the other boats that had full Dodger Bimini enclosures, and some of them had dinghies and dinghy davits. So that's why we put this boat as number 5. So we went into the broker's office and I said, look, I've seen some boats for cheaper. I didn't want to say they were crap, but I think we should talk about the price, and I offered him $60,000. He said, hold on, let me call the client. And 2 minutes later, he got off the phone and said, you got yourself a deal. And I'm thinking, damn, I should have said 55. But I was happy to pay 60 because I thought the boat was worth every penny of that. As the Google Maps shows for the final round trip, it says we did over 5,500 kilometers, and that's understating it because we obviously took detours for gas and food and other things. So let's just say 6,000 kilometers in 5 days. So it was quite the marathon session. I don't know if I'd suggest anyone else do that unless you're like us and don't mind sleeping in your car and taking turns driving. But since we found our boat, you have to say it was a successful trip. Okay, after all that, what were the lessons learned when we bought our boat? First of all, lesson number 1 is make sure your wife is on board. If you're going to buy a boat of this size, you probably want to make sure your wife wants to come along with you. Second point is don't trust pictures. Brokers are paid to sell boats and they're going to take pictures that only show the good points. The third point is southern saltwater boats get old fast, so if a boat seems like a very good deal, probably it's because it's really weather beaten. The final point is don't settle. There are plenty of boats out there, so if the boat you're looking at is sun-baked and weather-worn, just walk away. Well, that's the end of episode 1 of Cruising Off Duty. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it informative. On the next episode, we're going to talk about how do you ship a boat all the way from North Carolina to Ottawa. And when you get it there, how much work is involved in turning a saltwater boat into a freshwater boat before you launch in the spring. If you found this informative, please like it and also share it. And if you'd like to follow along in our journey, please subscribe. Thanks.